Hey guys, before we start this video proper, just a brief message. Friend of the channel, Mark Allen Gunnells, also fantastic writer from the horror community and actually wider fictional circles, is having some difficulties at the moment. His mother was recently diagnosed with terminal cancer, and Mark is having to take a leave of absence from work to care for her. So below you'll find links to a GoFundMe to help him pay for domestic costs, medical costs, and whatnot. Any little you can donate would be gratefully appreciated. So please do so if you can. And now on with the video. Thank you very much indeed, guys. Hello my loves, and welcome back to Strange Playgrounds, or Our Lives in Horror, depending on where you're listening to this. Ah man, autumn is finally starting to fall here in the UK. Thanks to climate change, autumn is coming later and later and later and later, and the temperature here is getting warmer and warmer and warmer and warmer and more intense every year. And those of you who know me well via this channel know that I hate summer. I hate heat, I hate the light. The latter half of the year for me is the time when I start to come alive. That's when everything starts to move and everything becomes vital and erotic and infectious and vital. That's the autumn and the winter are my seasons. And what I love about autumn more than anything, first of all, I love the climate. I love the dark, the drawing in days, the shorter days, the longer nights, the darker mornings and evenings. I love that. I find that very cozy. I tend to change my diet around this time because I like to eat sort of food that's autumnal in nature, you know? I find during summer and the heat, I just can't be bothered half the time. Eating is a chore in the intense heat. I just cannot be bothered with it. But my appetite surges around this time. But what also tends to happen is I tend to start to look back at media that has a kind of, I suppose, a sentimental attachment to me. That happens quite a lot. I tend to go back and watch shows and movies and films that I enjoyed when I was younger, when I was a younger man, or even when I was a child. Those of you who watch shows on this channel quite a lot know that I always tend to go back and rewatch a show called Nightmare. For example, a show called Nightmare from my childhood. Nightmare was a British children's show that ran from 1984, the year I was born, for 8 years. It ran for 8 years, which, by the way, is an enormous amount of time for a children's show to run in the UK. That just doesn't happen. For a homespun children's show to run for that long does not happen, by and large. There are one or two outliers, but by and large, that doesn't happen. They get like a year maximum, and that's it. Nightmare was incredible. It ran in 1984, and what it consisted of was it's a kind of mix between D&D and a game show. So it consisted of a virtual dungeon, and there would be teams of kids who would have to navigate through the dungeon. One of the kids would be the dungeoneer. They would be blindfolded by a helmet, and they would have to go down into the dungeon, which they couldn't see, obviously. It was all projected onto a blue screen. And the advisors would have to guide them through. There were 3 levels in each quest, escalating in difficulty, and each room, each chamber would have traps and puzzles, and they would have encounters with characters that they would have to navigate. They would have to solve riddles and answer questions, perform tasks for characters, select the right items to cope with particular situations. They would have to fight monsters and things like that. It was amazing. Technologically, this was 1984, so at the very, very beginning of computer technology, really, sort of domestic computer technology, it was technologically incredible. I don't know how it got made. I honestly don't know. Looking at it now, I don't know how the people like ponying up the money could have possibly understood what they were paying for. And I imagine that was it. They just didn't understand at the time that it was going to be like this, because it was technologically revolutionary. There was nothing like it, not just in children's television, but in TV in general. The other thing it got a reputation for was being the hardest show on television. There were 8 seasons, and in those 8 seasons, there was less than one winner per 2 seasons. Winning Nightmare was an accolade because it was punishingly difficult. The vast majority of teams didn't get off to level 1 because it's so hard. Also, very scary. There's this atmosphere in it to keep the pace up. There's this element, the life force meter, which is like a little computer-generated face that follows the dungeoneer through the dungeon. And as time goes on, bits of it flake away to reveal a skull, and then the skull flakes away, and when it's all gone, they die. To replenish it, they had to find food items to place in a knapsack that would replenish it, and also magic that would reinvigorate it. But if they spent too long, it was described as them literally starving to death in the dungeon, basically. On top of that, the show's host, Traegard, played by Hugo Myatt, would do this brilliant thing where if they lingered too long, he would start to say something like, "You're lingering too long in this chamber, team." And something like a chord of music would play, like really sinister music, or a heartbeat would start to speed up in the background. And either like a guy in a costume who was dressed as an ogre, or a computer-generated ghost or skull would come and chase them out of the room, effectively. So they only had a limited amount of time to perform their tasks, make their selection of items, solve all the riddles and whatnot, and it meant that there was this real sense of urgency and pace and horror to it as well. It's actually very scary. There's something about the dungeon, its crudity, to a modern eye, certainly the crudity of its rendering, that makes it really quite frightening. It's a beautiful show. You can find all of it here on YouTube. It's Nightmare, by the way, as in a knight, as in like an Arthurian knight, Knightmare. It's wonderful. It is an absolutely stunning show. And I would advise anyone to go and watch it. It actually stands up really well. It's from 1984, so some of the seasons do involve some pretty racist stereotypes, which were de rigueur on children's television in the UK at that point, so gonna have to forgive that, unfortunately. But by and large, the show is amazing. It's absolutely amazing. Interestingly, as well, one of the very few from the era that bridged the gender gap, shows from that era were often aimed exclusively at either boys or girls, and that was it. There was no middle ground. Nightmare appealed to everyone. Absolutely everyone. The teams vacillate. They're often mixed sex, so there's boys and girls in one team. If there's not, then it's a boy team, then a girl team. So it's really cool in that regard. Very unusual. Very, very, very unusual. And the fact that it was so challenging and frightening as well meant that it didn't condescend its audience. It treated its audience with a hell of a lot of respect. It was a brilliant show and stands up to an adult viewing, which the vast majority of shows from the era do not, obviously. Really stands up to an adult viewing. On a technical level alone, it's absolutely brilliant. But another show that I've gone back to recently is one that I love so much, and I've loved ever since I was a kid. It came out in 1988 here in the UK, so when I was 4 years old. And it's one that you kind of know. I did a series on the books a little while back, The Chronicles of Narnia, the BBC adaptations from the 1980s and the 1990s of C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. Now, those of you who've watched the previous series of videos know that my relationship with Lewis and those books is contentious. It's kind of up and down. It's ambiguous at best. I have such an attachment to those books because they're the books I learnt to read with. I was reading those books before this show came out, which is why I was so excited about it, you know. I had my mum's old copies of the Chronicles of Narnia that she had when she was at school. I've now given them to my young niece, so they're passing on through the family. So I loved those books. They were my gateway not only into fantasy literature but literature. They are so important to me. I did have that experience, as those of you who've watched the previous videos know, when I came back to them as a teenager with more critical faculties. seeing what Lewis was trying to do, and being the nascent gay agnostic atheist that I was at the time, seeing it and reacting quite badly to it, just discounting them entirely, and that's what tends to happen with these books, because Lewis was as close to like a fundamentalist Christian as we get in the UK, and also a pretty nasty racist bigot on top of it, and that does come through in the books. The books are attempts to sort of program children with his Christian perspectives, and that's problematic. That's really problematic. On the other hand, there is incredible imagination and beauty in these books, and if you shear away the sort of dogma of them and just look at the metaphysical ideas, they're actually very beautiful at times. A good example is in the first book, The Magician's Nephew, where it's established that there's like these crossroads between realities, and the crossroad takes the form of a forest, like a wood, and the different worlds are accessed by leaping into pools and puddles that are formed at the bases of trees. It's gorgeous. It is absolutely beautiful. Now, the BBC adaptations are stunning. I imagine to a modern eye, to a present-day eye, they may look very crude, they may seem very crude, but I love that about them. At the time, 1988, they were actually technological marvels. I remember there were shows on where they would talk, where people like in the on daytime television would talk to the people behind all of the computer effects and the animation and the animation models, and it was a big deal. The BBC spent a lot of money on these, and there's a lot of love in them. There's this X factor to them where obviously everyone involved knew of Lewis's pedigree and how important Lewis's books were and are to not only British fantasy, but what fantasy is. He's as significant, arguably, as Tolkien is, or Mervyn Peake, or Ursula K. Le Guin, As problematic as his books are, he is very, very important to what people preconceive of as fantasy. And as a result, a lot of effort was put into them. They are very strange. They are of their era, and at the time, it was the case that a lot of particularly genre shows like science fiction and fantasy were highly theatrical. They weren't realist. They didn't have to have like a realist quality in their acting or their framing. People accepted that they were slightly more abstract than the sort of realist or social tract shows that they would air alongside. And as a result, it feels like a big old stage play. The acting is really big and really expressive, and the costumes are slightly ropey and slightly theatrical in nature, like cobbled together, but it works. It really, really works. Far better, by the way, than the awful films that came out in the 2000s, which are hyper slick and have all of the best technology thrown at them. These shows are beautiful. There's something about them. There's an X factor. There's heart in them. There's soul, and they have such respect for the source material. These are incredible shows. In particular, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and The Silver Chair. My favourite of the books is also my favourite of the shows. The Silver Chair is stunning. It's an absolutely beautiful adaptation. Some of them struggle because the books are not the source material doesn't really lend itself to being adapted. So there are adaptations of Prince Caspian, for example, and there's not really much to work with there, but they do their best. They actually do their best. There's some good stuff in Prince Caspian, and The Voyage of the Dawn Treader is really interesting. Obviously the most expensive, because they had to build the boat, the actual ship, the Dawn Treader, and there are lots of on-location shooting, like on islands, European islands and whatnot. It's brilliant. It's kind of brilliant. I love these shows, and I can't be objective about them. So you guys may come to them. Those of you who are younger, who are used to more sophisticated television, may come to them and think, what the fuck is he talking about? These are terrible. They're ropey. The effects are terrible, which they are, by the way. The acting is really big and ridiculous and absurd. I love them. I love them because I was 4 years old, when I saw these. I remember they used to air at I think it was just after 6 on a Sunday evening. So I would often, when I was that age, I would often go to my nan's of the weekend, my grandparents, on the train with my mum. So we would rush home on the Sunday to get to watch The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, or The Chronicles of Narnia. So there's a great deal of sentiment there. The fact that they also aired in the autumn time and sort of like in autumn, winter, nearer Christmas, that's significant too. There's an associative quality to them. All that happens to I have to, if the minute I watch the title sequence and hear the musical cues, just unspoken, unspecified association bursts up in my mind, and it feels like being 4 years old again. It's very strange and beyond analysis in many respects, because it's so key to who you are. You know, when you encounter or re-encounter that media that shaped you, that informed you, it's very hard to analyze it with any great degree of objectivity, which I believe is a delusion anyway, by the way. Because it informs you. It informs your imagination. I go back now to the Chronicles of Narnia, and I can see my stories. I can see the stuff that I imagine in them. Because as objectionable as I find aspects of Lewis's metaphysics, it was arguably my first encounter with metaphysics, and therefore has shaped all that has come after. It's important to me. That notion of worlds connected to worlds, or worlds beyond worlds. I mean, any of you who've read Strange Playgrounds, or Essential Atrocities, or Born in Blood, or any of my short stories will know that's what I write about. Almost universally, it's very rare that doesn't crop up in my stories, because it's key to my understanding of reality. It's key to the shape of my imagination and my soul, in fact. And it's really wonderful going back and revisiting them now, 30 odd years later, by the way. It's an amazing experience, and seeing them in a whole new light, re-experience. That's what this season is for me. It's almost a season of cycles and revolutions. It's about returning to things, but also transcending. It's about experiencing the new in the old, taking something new from the old with new eyes, with new suites of experiences and preconceptions. And for me, that's what good media does. You know, that defines our relationship to what media is in general, to stories, to myth, to art. And it's sacred to me. That is as close to sacred as I come, to be perfectly honest. So yeah, again, go and watch them. They're really fun. The theatrical BBC adaptations from the 1980s of the Chronicles of Narnia, they are really, really fun. And they give you a kind of, for those of you who weren't alive at the time and didn't experience them, they give you a kind of window into what British TV and British culture was like at the time. What was it we were consuming? Because these were big deals, I'm telling you. These were enormous. They still, I mean, the fact that I'm here talking to you now about them, and I guarantee you, if you talk to anyone who was a kid in the UK at the time, they will know of them. They will know of them because they were huge.